welcome to today's Select Board regular meeting of December 17th, 2019. Has the meeting been properly warned, Jan?
Yes, it has.
Got started a little quickly, I apologize. It's okay, I'm taking the fall. And we're going to start with approval of minutes of November 26th and December 3rd in this case. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
All right, and all those in favor of approving the minutes of this November 26th and December 3rd, say aye.
Aye.
And aye, thank you, and that's 5-4-0. We are missing one today. Well, I've suddenly found myself thrown into chair, so I think the remarks I'm going to say are slightly personal, but I think they're a little personal to almost everybody around us and to our community. We lost a very young man in our community, little Michael, and I got to know this little boy over the summer, and he was a joy, and our hearts go out to his family and our whole community, really. So many people that we know and love here are involved with the family, and we're just pulling for him, and he just didn't make it. But it's holiday season, and this is our last board meeting before a lot of holidays coming up and our bit of a break that we take. So I just ask you all to count your blessings and hug your kids close. Thank you.
Thank you.
Manager's comments?
Yes. I have an exciting announcement for town government that Stephen Dotson will be the town's first sustainability coordinator. He'll be beginning work on our team on February 3rd. He was one of over 75 applicants for this position. I can state unequivocally that during my time with the town, this was the largest, strongest applicant pool that we had for any of the openings that have come up in the last 5 years. Lots of interest in the position, lots of well-qualified people, and a difficult selection process, which is a great place for us to be. We had lots of help in this, so both Liz McLaughlin and Dave Scholes participated in the process, along with HR Director Sally Nix and Public Works Director Steve Barrett. Sue Fillion, the Planning Services Director, was on the selection committee, and she and I together did the final review of two really well-qualified finalists, because Stephen will be working within the Planning Services Department and reporting directly to Sue. He'll also be a member of our management team, working together with the department heads. And also participating in the screening and interviewing process were Oscar Heller, Chair of the Energy Committee and a very active member of the community in promoting the sustainability position when we were considering whether or not to create that. And Elizabeth Bridgewater, the Executive Director for the Windham-Windsor Housing Trust. We really appreciated the time that they volunteered to this effort to help us make sure that we had a broad perspective in the selection process. I think a lot of people know Stephen. He's done a lot of work on sustainability issues and social action issues around the area and in his prior career elsewhere. One thing about him is, in addition to being an employee of a few different organizations locally over the years, he has provided lots of services, some leadership services as well as assistance as a contractor and a consultant to a variety of organizations. So I'm going to take a minute, just for those who don't know Stephen, to understand the breadth of what he's done already in our area and why we think that he stood out as being particularly the best person for this job. He's been Director of Communications and Marketing for the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association, Corporate Sustainability Operations Associate for One Report Incorporated, an Associate Director at the Rich Earth Institute. He's been on the Windham Regional Commission as a commissioner representing Westminster. He's a board member at the Southeastern Vermont Economic Development Strategies leadership team, a member of the leadership team for the Ecovation Hub, was one of the initial co-creators of Hermit Thrush Brewery, and has provided assistance and service to the Brattleboro Savings and Loan, Retreat Farm, Friends of the West River Trail, Resilient Design Institute, and the Strolling of the Heifers Slow Living Summit. He's a person who has been deep into this work in a variety of ways over the years, and will now be leading our town effort around sustainability, both internally and out in the community.
Great.
Congratulations, Stephen Dotson.
Wonderful. Exciting to have such a well-qualified and a local person who's already very familiar with what we're going through. Thank you, Peter. The next item on our agenda is fellow select board member comments and/or committee reports. Does anybody have anything they'd like to throw out?
No committee report. I did, on the way in, notice it's a really beautiful night.
And people, and I noticed this afternoon and then again this evening, because I had to be out, that
People are being remarkably considerate and careful driving in these conditions. So it's a nice reminder that people actually know how to do it.
That's nice. A nice comment. Anyone else?
No, thank you.
And your comment actually makes me think. This is
Oh.
breaking protocol here, but
Oh, no.
I did see a note from our fire department that they would like everybody, if you are near a fire hydrant, to please clear out around 3 feet around, all the way around. It really does help us out in times like these. And I think I'll just roll right into public participation, and this is the time when we invite members of the public to come up and say their piece. Just try to limit it to 2 minutes. We have a huge audience tonight, but anyone here would like to say anything? This is for anything that's not on tonight's agenda. Just throw it out. Hi, Franz.
Hi, Franz Reichsman, District 2. I'm going to comment on two things that are on the agenda because I have to leave. And they are the budget and municipal broadband. And I just want to, speaking strictly for myself here, want to say that, as I said last week, I think, that I would like to see a budget item on municipal broadband go into the fiscal year 2021 budget. I think it's, I know you'll be talking about this some more. I just wanted to register my opinion right now. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for starting off with an unorthodox comment. Anyone else?
Continuing your pattern.
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Anyone else with any comments they'd like to say or questions? Jokes? No? Okay. We are moving on because we are not required tonight to do liquor commissioners or water and sewer commissioners. So our first order of business is an unfinished business item where we will discuss consideration of municipal broadband. I believe this is the third time that this has come before us.
Yes. May I give a quick update about
Certainly.
that?
I wasn't sure which way to go.
Yeah, I think that Dave should lead off substantively, but I'd like to just ground the
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
public in the knowledge that this was considered a couple of times previously, earlier in the fall by the select board. The action that the board took on the second evening of consideration was twofold: for the town to monitor and be engaged in the regional effort to create a communications union district, a CUD, for southeastern Vermont, and to write a letter to several state officials who were comprised a committee that was looking into the question of whether municipalities ought to be allowed to use general obligation bonds to fund municipal communications, telecommunications facilities. And we took a strong position, the town did, at select board direction, a strong position in favor of that being allowed, that utilization of general obligation bonding authority being allowed, on the principle that it represents self-governance and that communities ought to decide whether to use general obligation bonds rather than the state deciding whether or not it's okay for communities to use general obligation bonds. Those are the two directed actions. We did those two things. We are engaged with the regional effort that's getting underway. We wrote the letter, we received a response, and received consideration to the town's opinion in the report that that committee wrote to the legislature, but the committee decided not to recommend general obligation bonding authority. That report was distributed to all of you, and Select Board Member Dave Scholes responded to that distribution by asking for some further consideration this evening. Here we are.
Yeah, it seemed like, the letter from the DPS came, was distributed to us, but we didn't ever talk about it. We just got that information. And so I thought we should talk about it. That seemed like that was the next sort of signpost along the way toward our conversations about how to pursue broadband. And their conclusion was, I think it's fair to say, is to wait and see. And initially, I was thinking, well, that's terrible because we'd have a lot more options if we could do the general obligation bond and just spread it over the whole community. And I kind of thought that, as I often do when I have a thought, I think I'm right. And I'm not quite so sure about that now because I talked to somebody from, I'm going to forget his name, but it'll come back to me, from who's the Norwich representative on the EC Fiber Communication Union District, which is Norwich, Barnard, and a few other towns around there. And he pointed out that he actually supported it. And I said, well, I got nothing more to say to this guy. But his perspective is that it would mean that only towns that had a lot of money would be able to do this, and other towns wouldn't be able to do it, and or it would be much harder. And a lot of people who maybe don't have any use for the service would wind up having to pay for it. And although that's true of a lot of things in the world, you may not use every service that the town provides. You still have to, or for instance, schools, but you certainly get a benefit from it. So, but he talked a lot about the Union District and the advantages of that. But the primary one is that they started, and this is almost 20 years ago now that they started doing this, and they wound up not getting it. They were ready. No, it was in 2008, and they were ready to go, and they had investors lined up, and then the banks exploded, and Lehman went out of business, and all the investors, that all went away. So they started over, and they found some individuals who would contribute, I think, up to about $90,000, and they did a stretch through town. And then the point of all this is that they took a really diverse approach. They got some users to invest in shorter-term bonds, no-interest bonds that would gradually get paid back from the revenues. They created their own model, and so that made the Communications Union District seem more appealing to me, because my context is the Waste Management District and the merged school district, and the issues that the towns have where interests don't align get really contentious and sometimes just bring things to a halt. And I still want this to move a lot faster. So but I've continued to look around. A couple of the articles, this one came late. I just found out about this on Sunday. That Bristol, New Hampshire, which is a town of not a few thousand people, and it's in the article here somewhere, did their own. They got $98,000. The town approved spending $98,000, and they got a $132,000 grant, and they did a 3-mile stretch of Main Street, and now they're bit by bit trying to roll it out into the other communities. So that's another model. The Chesterfield, obviously they can do those bonds, and they did it. And one of the people, Brad Roscoe, I think I'm remembering his name right. He was going to come to the meeting, but unless you're Brad, right, you're not. He decided not to come because of the weather to talk about Chesterfield. And the other example was the excerpts that I sent in the link, although it's a link on paper, it's not very easy to link to, from Kentucky, where they did wire this very rural county, and in a few years they created 300 jobs, and many of them went to people that were making $5 an hour in an auto parts store or somewhere like that, and were able to get much better jobs, telecommuting, and so. The conclusion of all that is that there are a bunch of different ways that we could proceed, And so I wanted to find, I'm sorry Patrick's not here because I suspect he has some maybe you do have information about, you mentioned that we are engaged in the CUD process. Maybe you can talk about some of the progress that is going on there.
Sure.
That would be great. But basically my question is, well, first question is, do we want to proceed? Because there was some resistance, and some hesitant. Liz obviously doesn't, she's shaking her head no. So I need to find that out before I try to get us to determine how we want to do it.
Okay.
So-
Well, I'm going to let you steer a little bit. You threw a question to
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
town manager,
Yeah.
so.
Sure. So
Thank you.
the way I would characterize what's happened so far is there has been preparation to launch the CUD process. A fair amount of it, lots of communication among the parties who intend to participate in it, as well as some coordination among those who are organizing it and bringing in resources to assist. And it will launch all but immediately after the holidays. I don't know the exact date of the meeting in January, but there's a meeting that has been scheduled to be held in January where the group will assemble and begin to identify the steps they're going to take to move forward. They will be receiving advice from the individuals who created, well, the ones who created EC Fiber will be speaking from their direct experience with the creation of a district similar to what is being envisioned for southeastern Vermont. And there's funding that's been provided by the state that's being provided to the Windham Regional Commission to assist in this effort. I don't know the details of that, and I don't know whether or not it's coming with technical assistance from the state. But I do know that there's that they've engaged individuals who had participated in the organization around EC Fiber to bring that experience here.
And the state also funded a position for a person to provide support for exactly what you're talking about.
Right, and that's the part. I don't know whether or not that person is already engaged in providing that support around the state, and whether they are part of what's going to be the launch here, or whether it's just state funding that's going to help in terms of paying for the expertise that's coming in from the EC Fiber folks and perhaps others. But Patrick will be representing the town in that. He unfortunately wasn't able to be here for this evening's meeting, but he certainly will go to that first meeting and be able to provide a further update to us in January about what he learns there and how it's intended to move forward from here.
Before throwing it out to some other comments, I thought I might just ask for a couple clarifications on what you're actually looking for as far as a discussion. When you talk about broadband, and we talked about this twice before in sort of broad terms about high-speed internet, and I think a lot of the time there's a confusion around the term because the term is rather broad, quite literally. Because often when people are speaking of broadband, they're speaking about fiber. And I assume that's kind of what gets you excited.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a good clarification, at least for me. But I'm kind of curious, if you want something to be, you're advocating for something to be on our town meeting, what would that look like?
Well, that's what I thought that the way to proceed was to put some money in for a study to explore all the different options. And I don't know if we don't do that, and the CUD looks like it's going to take ages, then it'll be a whole year before we can put anything in the budget again, because that's not even going to start until January.
Right.
So where I am now is wondering whether to pursue that or not. And I think what I'd like to do is talk to Patrick and maybe the people of the district and find out a little bit more about what the prospects are for that. And if there's, I think that money has to be raised for the work. And if it's the initial money from the state is for exploring, but it's not going to get anything done. So I don't know exactly what to ask for. But we'll find out more before we're done with the budget, if possible.
If you recall, at the last meeting, I think it was October 15th, we generally had, at least three of us, I believe Brandy was also absent at that meeting as well. So there was only four of us at that meeting as well.
No, Brandy was there, because she had issues with the company that was doing the work in Chesterfield. I remember that really distinctly.
Daniel, were you here?
Oh,
Daniel was
I
there.
recall Brandy not being here, but
Okay,
that's
well, it
fine.
might have been another meeting.
Yeah, since there were two earlier. So I'm just wondering, I remember Liz saying a couple of comments that I agreed with, which were why, if there's so many steps that could be taken in the community and exploring some background on this and gauging our community of whether or not people are really interested in this, pursuing this, however we might pursue it, why wouldn't we do that work first? And you actually volunteered to get the ball rolling, speaking to people, and it seemed...
And having people come in and talk with the snow.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know even, I don't want to call out Franz because he's not a member of this board, but a comment that Franz made was that there wasn't, he personally didn't support going towards the study until there were numbers attached to it. So I guess I'm just wondering, I feel like you are kind of feeling your way a little bit, which is fine, but in order for us to make a decision on actually putting something on the agenda, it would have to be a little more concrete.
Yeah.
Otherwise, maybe it should wait for petition if it was something that you really needed to
Well,
see.
well, it depends. I think that the part that I absolutely agree with is we need to get a broader sense from the community whether they would support it or not. And a petition and a conversation at town meeting would certainly indicate that interest. And that may be, the way to pursue. I would like us to talk about it at town meeting. I'm just not sure how to go about that. I'd like to get a consensus from the meeting about how vigorously we should proceed in this direction. I think it's really urgent, and that's the reason that I'm anxious to get things moving.
I have a comment.
Please.
So 3 weeks ago, I'd say, or I don't know exactly how long ago, we voted on a measure, didn't we not?
I don't. Well, you mean? Do you remember we had that sort of menu of options
Right.
to take? We went
Yes.
to 1 and 2, but I don't
Yes.
think we actually took a vote.
Okay.
I think it was consensus.
Well, so we had
Yeah,
a
four.
consensus, and that consensus was to go with the CUD, to gain knowledge from them of what they were doing in lieu of spending money on a study, because they were getting state resources, they were getting state personnel, they were discussing this, and frankly, the more rural towns have a greater interest in better service than Brattleboro has. So I am content to stick with the decision or consensus that we made just a short while ago and gain, whatever knowledge we can from that. It's interesting because, Peter talked about that there were 2 steps, and the one step was the CUD and the second step was the letter. So we got an answer to our letter, and I understand that you're eager, Johnny on the spot, to discuss it. But I think we need time for the CUD to learn, and we learn from that process. And we haven't had that time yet because it hasn't really started. So I think it's premature, and I am content with the decision that we made, and I want to let that bear fruit.
Just a couple of responses. One is that the decision included me finding people to come in and talk about the advantages of different systems, so that's what I'm doing. The other thing, I don't think, from the responses that I've seen, and they're small, but the number of responses I've seen, I've heard more people say, well, the rural places don't need it, the downtown needs it because that's where the businesses are concentrated. So I don't think there's a conclusion that the rural communities are more interested in it or not. And we're rural and urban, so it really doesn't matter. The fact that it's been 3 months and so far the CUD is prepared to launch indicates it's going to be a very slow, tedious process, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a better process. And so I'm looking to keep as many different options going as possible. And obviously, you can support what you feel comfortable supporting. I'm still going to do that. I'm still going to promote whatever we can, and I will participate more actively and communicate with Patrick about the CUD. But I have heard nothing about it since it was initially in paper. And so obviously there's not much to report. But at this point, I don't really have an action that I want us to take until I get a better sense of whether that's going to proceed. It is a really good model. At least the way EC Fiber rolled it out, it's a really flexible model. And but it may mean that we still have to pay for ours all on our own anyway. So we'll see.
Daniel?
I remain fairly agnostic about this. I guess the one thing I want to kind of point out for folks who might be following along at home, like, so some of the communities that we've been compared to here are really small. So Leverett, Massachusetts has a population of, or at least from the 2010 census, had a population of 1,876 people compared to our nearly 13,000. And they had 813 households. We have 5,421. The amount of money that they raised in bonds for that project was $3.6 million for 813 households, of which 667 of them ended up becoming subscribers. And what I don't want us to go too far down a road is to kind of envision this project that is presumably at least a couple of times larger than that. You know, maybe it's in the tens of millions of dollars. And Leverett, Massachusetts was also a place that did not have access to any meaningful broadband of any sort. So there was no competitors there. We've already heard from Patrick's report that where towns have tried to do this, where there are competitors, those competitors compete. And that means that they're able to offer deals that they wouldn't typically. And, you know, I'm not saying that I'm in love with our local internet providers as things stand. I would love for a better deal. But if what it meant was I got a better deal and then the town was left holding all this infrastructure without subscribers to actually support it, that's bad for our taxpayers. So those are my concerns about it. I mean, like I say, I'm agnostic. If somebody can show me a way that this is financially viable for a town our size with the number of house sites and with the number of miles, right? Because we're also talking about laying cable. I mean, I guess in like the biggest vision would be laying cable to every single house site in Brattleboro. So how many miles of cable are we talking? It sounds to me like it would be a heck of a lot of money. And we know that we can't use general obligation bonds, so we can't raise money without having to worry whether it'll make money, right? We have to raise money through, and you can correct me if I get this wrong. Please do. So revenue bonds means that it has to like be kind of something that is able to make money.
Exactly. It's called a revenue bond because it has to be attached to a specific revenue stream that will pay off the bond.
So that would be subscribers for this service, which we would be competing with.
But it can be for a very long period of time.
Yeah, exactly. It could be for a really long period of time. And in the report from the state, it says here, a 2017 financial assessment conducted by the Center for Technology, Innovation and Competition at the University of Pennsylvania School of Law found that 11 of 20 projects assessed were cash flow negative during the assessment period. 5 projects had an estimated repayment period of 100 years. 2 projects were pegged at over 60 years, and only 2 were slated to break even. And so I don't often find myself in the fiscal conservative role on this board, but I think that, you know, our taxpayers need to be getting their money's worth, and I worry about going too far down a road for like a tens of millions of dollars vision, unless there was something that, you know, and I understand why we would study it, right? Because like we don't know. I'm not an expert in this. I'm taking opinions from folks that know more than I do, and so there's something to be said for a study. But even if a study is $80,000 and it looks like we're going to end up with a project that's $20 million and we really don't know if it's going to work, I don't know if I even want to spend that $80,000. When there are other things in Brattleboro right now that $80,000 would do a lot to help with. So that's where I'm at.
A couple responses and I'm happy to move on.
Oh, sure.
obviously, it's entirely possible that Brattleboro is not large enough to sustain something like this on its own. That's one of the things I want to make sure that we find out.
Dave,
I have
could you
no
speak
idea.
up, please?
Sorry?
Speak up, please.
Yeah, it's entirely possible that Brattleboro is not large enough to sustain this kind of a thing, even if we paid it off over 100 years. And that's why the CUD might be a more viable option. And so that's entirely possible. I think the important thing about the competitors competing, at least in the examples that are in place now, Chattanooga, Tennessee is one of them. There's several others, a couple in North Carolina, I think Greenville, a couple other much larger towns than us that have done municipal fiber. And they found that what they did basically is resist and try and keep them from using the poles and try and keep them from having access and not cooperating with the backloading, because that has to go through those kinds of providers. But the deals that they offered were the typical deal that you get from a place like Comcast. Sign up and we'll give you all of it for $20 this year, and next year it's $180. And so that hasn't changed. That model didn't change, and people are continually paying more than they need to. It's also important that places like Korea and Singapore have the entire nation, and they have lots of rural areas in Korea. The entire nation is wired, and the effect on the economy is really astonishing. There's no question about what happens when you have that degree of broadband. And that's the primary reason that we're looking at this in terms of the potential economic growth.
Yeah, I'm sure that it would have a benefit to our economic development. Whether the benefit would match our outlay and continued like operation of a municipal utility is the big question mark.
Yeah, certainly. And it has to be answered.
Maybe.
Just like it can be answered sooner rather than later. And again, if the CUD process is moving and has some time, some milestones and some goals and some time frames involved with it, then I'm perfectly content to let that play out. I just don't want to have it take forever. Those initiatives have not had a lot of success when towns are trying to work together on things. So, and the state obviously doesn't always help.
I think, before I throw it out, if maybe there's a couple of people that might want to say something, I just want to point out that I think Patrick, because he's not here, he did caution us in putting a lot of hopes in the CUD, just because there was something described such as the donut hole, which is to this effect that the larger populated communities in these areas actually don't see the benefit that the least populated communities.
I have an update on the donut hole.
Me too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, just that I mentioned that to the gentleman from Norwich, and he pointed out that it's not as bad as it seems or as it was described. It's not really it's not, well, you may have some better information just generally, but he said that it's really not accurate to think that a place like Brattleboro wouldn't be served by a CUD.
Maybe you could
It's one of the
describe
things that
what
changed
it
my
means.
So I think it's actually more nuanced than would Brattleboro be served or would it not be served, and it's because Brattleboro itself has some land use diversity. So what we have come to understand, and I would say our understanding is still really in the early stages, right? The thing is in the process of launching, and we'll know a lot more a month from now, 2 months from now, about where it seems to be headed. But one of the things that Patrick learned and shared with me is the CUD could have a benefit for Brattleboro, broadly defined, because of the communities that are outside of Brattleboro being adjacent to parts of Brattleboro that are currently not served by the major carriers. And so there still would in fact be a donut hole, or in our case sort of the cavity in a sea.
Amoeba hole.
Well, it would be circled,
Yeah.
but the downtown Brattleboro area and the developed residential area immediately around that is well served right now, actually by competitive providers. And so that's the area where it would be hard for us to present ourselves as a public alternative to that in a way that would compete favorably, because they've got such tremendous resources internationally. So they could afford to undercut us. But that's within the developed part of Brattleboro. And so out in the area of Brattleboro that is currently underserved or unserved, that is adjacent to Dummerston and to Marlborough and to Guilford. There is at least a possibility, I think probably a likelihood, that if a southeastern Vermont CUD gets going, that those parts of Brattleboro could in fact benefit significantly from the regional CUD.
And then we'd be in the happy position of having a reverse HUD situation where we take advantage of the resources and the infrastructure that the surrounding towns have rather than the other way around.
That's interesting.
I'm not sure that's how it works, but
Oh, well,
Yeah, does anybody in the public, do you mind if I throw it out to anyone who might be
well, I
here?
just wanted to mention that Daniel made a slightly different point than David's in saying that the benefit was to very small communities. And so David mentioned maybe we're not big enough. That's not the case. We may be too big,
Relatively.
relatively too big.
to get aid from the state.
Enough, right?
Yeah.
Sort of that Goldilocks effect.
Yes.
Or anti-Goldilocks.
Yes. I mean, I had a couple comments too, but I was just going to throw it out. Anybody who wanted to speak to it who's here tonight, or no? Chris? My only comment was it's still, and I said this at the last meeting, it still feels like a bit of a solution in search of a problem to me. We have, according to Patrick's good report that he gave us a few meetings ago, 95% broadband, which is defined broadly, already in Brattleboro. We do have some outskirts that don't get very good service, and it's something certainly to work on. But we have fiber to this building, and we have fiber to, I just confirmed with somebody who helps me with my computers, Patrick Byrne out on Burge Street. There's 200 up, 200 down, which was a nice number that I've heard about being thrown about in fiber, and that's just the beginning. You can get 1,000 up and 1,000 down, and I won't go into all of what that means. But that's fast internet, it's super fast fiber, but it's already available. Now, I don't know the coverage, and that's part of the homework too, I think, to make sure that we have a problem. In my mind, let's make sure we have a real problem that is slowing us down, either from an economic development standpoint or from an equity standpoint, and we're not really sure where we are, I don't think, yet, before we can go forward with solving the problem, in my opinion. The Chesterfield partnership with Consolidated Communications is brand new. So as swimmingly as it seems to be going so far, I've heard some good things. That doesn't mean it's going to go really well. And they're also a model that we can't replicate here at this time, by my understanding, the way that they handled it. So right now, the general obligation bond is off the table. A lot of us are uncomfortable. Daniel, you spoke to the problem with revenue bonds, and at the last meeting, I think you mentioned equity and how that really just goes towards serving people who can afford it often, because the town would be forced to make money from the deal. So I just don't quite get the urgency at the moment. I'd love to see evidence that the lack of cohesive municipal broadband is slowing us down somehow, or impacting our economic development, because I'm not hearing that. I'm not hearing that so far from businesses who need fast internet. Anyway, that's my...
Just one thing I think I can clear up. Again, the gentleman from EC Fiber I mentioned that we have fiber going through town. Everyone Sabina put it in. They put one of their junctions up at Academy School, and the school gets a little discount because it hosts that site.
I'm sorry, did you say Sobernet?
Did I say Sabina? I said Sabina. Yeah, when it was Sabina.
Okay, is that, I get confused. Is that now First Light?
I don't know whether it was sold
Yeah,
and changed.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but it was
And you
Sabina
said
when they
it's
did
at
that.
Academy School?
Yes.
Is that what, I just didn't hear you.
And Gosh, I'm not talking well. I don't know. It seems like I'm fine. I've got new hearing aids, so maybe I'm
We've got the
whispering.
heater going as well.
But it
It's
sounds
this-
loud to me. Let me
it's
turn it
noisy
down a
over
little
here.
bit.
It's the
Oh, okay.
fans, probably.
The fiber that we have, it's a point-to-point fiber. It's not it's designed to have branches going off. So if someone's having access to it, they are somehow related to that point. It's a different design that they're doing in Norwich and Barnard, and in that EC fiber district. Good. You need to hear that.
All right, well then, you're not requesting we take an action?
Yeah.
Okay. Unless anyone else has any other comments, I guess we'll move on to new business. And we have, I need to cough. Sorry. We have a financial report to go over.
We do. So the monthly financial report for the first 5 months of the fiscal year, 41.7% of the fiscal year is complete. The prorated rate of expenditure in the general fund is 40.0. We're in good shape there. In fact, good shape across the board in this report, particularly in the parking fund. Of course, the parking fund is a little distorted because our capital expenditures from the parking fund are not in a separate capital fund. They're expended from the annual budget that you approve for the parking fund. So this is a number that will increase in the spring, but still, we've expended only 35.2% of the parking fund allocation in this 41.7% so far of the fiscal year. And the utilities fund, again, using a proration because of the fact that we make a couple of very large payments early in the year for annual interest and sludge removal. The prorated rate of expenditure is 40.5% in the utilities fund against that 41.7% marker. So good shape in all the major areas of operation. We have just shy of $4.2 million in outstanding loans that are being repaid to the town. There are, as there have been for many months now, 2 loans that are overdue but still where payments are being made. 1 loan that's in default and fully reserved. And there's a notation in this month's report, closure, unhappy closure, but not unexpected closure on the cultural intrigue matter, where we knew that there was a default, that the town was not going to receive the remaining funds. We did file a court action attempting to get some leverage there, and the court has ordered that cultural intrigue is free of paying back the debt of $67,837 to the town, and so that has been written off the books. That loan balance has been written off. The program income report shows that there are $492,000 or so available for loans and grants. That's a number, of course, that fluctuates some from month to month. We're always receiving repayments into that fund, and we're occasionally making disbursements from the fund. But we're right now just shy of $500,000 of available funding there. We currently have 40 active grants that the town is implementing and 5 grants that you have authorized us to apply for. We're still in the application process. Have any questions?
No?
I just to see we're on the other side of the where we're supposed to be at this time. A little surplus in the general fund. Nice to see.
I have one quick question.
Yes.
You mentioned that there was a loan late. When loans become late,
Yes.
what's the process that is taken to...
So there's communication ongoing between the finance department and the folks who owe these loans virtually as soon as anybody becomes late. And what we typically find is that somebody might have run into some cash flow issues at the business that was funded through the grant, or through their loan rather, I'm sorry, or that there's some other circumstance where folks just need a little bit of time and then they continue to make some payments while they're behind and then they get back current. That is the normal course of action. There are times when it becomes a more extreme situation like that. There was one that came before this board sometime last year, not in this fiscal year, but in the prior fiscal year, that we redid some restructuring. There was a loan that had been a 10-year loan. We were about halfway through the repayment period, and a local person who was really committed to repaying the funds had fallen far enough behind that they weren't going to be able to repay the funds on the original schedule, but made a very large payment, sold a piece of property, made a very large payment against that outstanding balance, and then we restructured the remainder of what was owed to the town for a new 10-year period. So that'll happen from time to time. It's very rare that we actually have somebody who just walks away and where the debt has to be written off. That did happen, unfortunately, in the cultural entry.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have an observation from the parking fund. I see that parking meter revenue is at 46%, right,
Yes.
ahead of the curve, and parking fines are down at 33%, which might suggest that the new parking meter system is working well, because there are
Yes.
fewer fines than you would have expected and more payments.
Might be the
But
key
it
word.
also could not.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's money in the bank.
Absolutely. And the fund overall is doing well.
Yeah.
We do have some repair costs coming up though, because somebody hit the last one on the west side of Main Street before you get to Elliott, and it's looking like the Tower of Pisa now.
But when we know who that somebody is, we recover.
do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it's an insurance claim usually, but yeah.
I hope it wasn't one of our plans.
I don't know the particulars of that
Yeah.
that instance, but a lot of times when there is damage, particularly street side damage to town infrastructure, we're able to recover those funds.
That's why Cool Hand Luke was in prison, by the way.
And
you
there's
guys
a
are
random
running
fact.
That's a valuable piece of culture.
Anytime I can help.
Some cultural intrigue.
There's
Yes,
a movie
go.
I'd like to watch
Failure
again.
to communicate.
That's right. That's what we have here.
Hopefully not too often.
So, thank you, Peter, for the report. Next is we have errors and omissions to the grand list, and we might be hearing from Jennifer.
We will.
Welcome. And would you like to just let us know our process, just for the viewing public?
So, I have something written down, so.
Yeah.
If it is discovered an error or omission in the listing of real or personal property after it became the grand list, the approval of the select board is necessary to make a correction. Such errors or omissions of property listings may be corrected on or before December 31st. The grand list was lodged June 26, 2019, with the town clerk. From this date until today, the assessors have identified changes. And if you could please examine the attached spreadsheets from the material you were provided, detailing the errors and omissions to the 2019 grand list, which are being submitted for your review and approval. I'll continue. There were 5 changes to the value of real properties. 2 were the result of BCA hearings. 1 corrected an error in the sale of 2 contiguous parcels. 1 was the result of lister voted exemption. And 1 is an exemption per state statute. There were 4 changes of value of business personal property due to late filings or filings that were corrected after the grand list was lodged in June. There were 3 changes in tax stabilization. 1 participant in the farm tax stabilization program didn't submit the required paperwork, so the property has been removed from the farm tax stabilization list. The other 2 involved a correction in the methodology used to calculate value of tax stabilization applied to the real property and personal property at Commonwealth Dairy. Commonwealth Dairy adjustments warrant a more detailed explanation. While the assessed value of Commonwealth's business personal property has been materially reduced per the outcome of a grievance, the tax value of Commonwealth's real estate and personal property both have increased. This is due to a correction in the methodology of calculating the amount of tax stabilization that Commonwealth is entitled to under its 2011 agreement with the town. The calculations related to that complex set of adjustments is included in the bottom of the schedule of the attached sheet entitled Errors Omission Schedule 2019 Tax Stabilization. When the adjustment is made to reflect the increase in Commonwealth's taxable value despite the decrease in Commonwealth's assessed value, the net change in the total taxable value townwide for both real estate and business personal property is an increase in taxable value of $905,705. And I can help answer any questions you might have.
Okay, before we go into further discussion, I'd like to just amplify two pieces of what Jen just described. Select board members who've been involved in this over the years and close observers to town finances will recognize that this is a really unusual moment in what is a really standard, frankly, sort of kind of boring but necessary, statutorily required procedure where we do small corrections each year to the grand list for the reasons that Jen described. What's different this year is the adjustment is much more complicated because of the Commonwealth Dairy situation, and because of that and the particular aspects of that, the grand list is actually increasing. The total taxable value based on this errors and omissions report is increasing by almost $1 million. And what we normally see at this time of year is a decrease because normally in a less complicated errors and omissions report, what we have is the report on adjustments that have been made because of the grievance process. So we lodge a grand list in June, property owners can contest their values, that process goes on through the summer and fall to make whatever adjustments might be made, and most often at this moment in time, we have a less complicated list that ends up with news that we're a little disappointed with. It's not usually a big decline, but it's usually a decline. And instead, this year we have an increase and a much more complicated report. Just wanted to note that for the record.
I must say, I'm confused because of this Commonwealth Dairy line. The old value was $16 million and the new value was $5 million changed. So we lost $10 million?
That's the personal property valuation that Jen referred to in the report as the assessed value went down, but the taxable value has actually gone up because the formula by which the amount of the assessment, so they are in a tax stabilization agreement for another 2 more years, this year and next year?
Yes.
And under that tax stabilization agreement, so much of that $16 million was being stabilized, so that reduced their tax obligation, that we're actually seeing this year an adjustment where the value, the assessed value went down, but the proportion of that that's taxable has gone up so significantly that we're going to have an increase in the taxable value.
So it went from the original taxable value of almost $4 million
Yes.
to the total corrected of five.
Over five. Five and a half about.
5.5.
Yes, that's exactly correct.
Correct.
Thank you.
Could you say more about business personal property? What is that?
Business personal property.
Yeah.
So we require businesses to send in an asset report of their equipment and any assets that they use to run their business. It can be desks, file cabinets, and the such. We do not require inventory, but we do have a tax on the depreciated value of your equipment. The equipment may be fully depreciated, but however, we assess that at 10% of its original cost. So there's always a value placed on the equipment.
And so if I'm reading this correctly, Commonwealth's business personal property went down, our assessment of that went down quite significantly.
Correct.
But their assessed value for their real estate
So
increased.
they grieved their value.
I'm trying to not muddy the waters, but I'm trying to just
No,
make sure.
it's a very complicated question, and far more complicated than usual. So what happened was they grieved their value, and they won their grievance. So their assessed value was reduced very significantly. But Jen discovered that the amount of whatever that value is, whether it had been the original number or this revised number or something else at the outcome of the grievance process, whatever that number was, that it should be the proportion of it that should be taxed versus the proportion that where the tax is forgiven under the stabilization agreement, that taxable portion should have been far greater. And so there was a dialogue that went on with Commonwealth where the resolution of the matter was that because they won their grievance, the value is changed to that value. But because the town substantiated that the formula that should be applied to that value would require a far greater amount of taxation percentage, they accepted that, and that's where we've landed. And that adjustment, the adjusted methodology will apply again to next year. And after that, they'll be just in the system like everybody else because we will have reached the end of their tax stabilization agreement.
Great. And this is all within the business personal property assessments?
Well, the Commonwealth matter affected both their business personal
Okay, that
property
was my
numbers
question.
and their real estate numbers. So again, I apologize for the degree to which this is convoluted. It is convoluted. There was appeal of the values. That was one part of this, and there was the adjustment of the methodology that was the other part of this. The two work to different effect on the numbers. So this year, it's very complicated and very confusing, but we end up in the good place of almost $1 million of additional value on the books for taxable value, so we'll actually yield some additional revenue to the town. Going forward, the report, both next year, because we won't be making all these different adjustments related to a complicated owner of property, and in years beyond that, because they won't be in tax stabilization any longer, it should be a simpler report again.
I just have a question about some of the language used. Why do we call it business personal property tax? I always found that confusing.
So I believe the state calls it that in the
really?
statutes. Yeah, that's
Because when I see
Awkward.
business and personal next to each other, it feels...
totally agree. Right.
Okay, keep them
Yeah.
separate.
Unless it's your
Why it's
personal
not an
business.
equipment tax or something else like that is a good question.
Yeah.
I totally agree with the confusion it creates by being business personal property.
Right, okay. My other question is, we always call this the errors and omissions
Yes.
report. Is it really errors, omissions, and adjustments? Because most of the changes tend to come from grievance, right? Or most of the detailed changes.
No, not all. The BCA level,
Board of Civil Authority.
correct, thank you. Board of Civil Authority level would warrant a change if it was reduced from the decision. Late filings for business personal property, they are adjustments, but there can be an error. An example of one where there was a sale of 2 parcels, each parcel separate parcels. They were contiguous, so in the state's mind, they were taxed on one tax bill, and they were sold off to separate parties. Each parcel had a house. The one house had not been removed from the main parcel, so it's called the parent parcel. So if you have 2 parcels, you have one parcel that's the parent parcel. That was an error on our part. Or it could be looked at as an omission.
Okay.
So,
It's also the terminology, just like how the business personal property tax is terminology that's required under state statutes, so is the errors and omissions report.
it is, and it's,
So other nomenclature might feel more logical or common sense, but the report we have to file, there's a certificate you will sign tonight after you take this action. That is the errors and omissions certificate that's required for the town to submit to the state of Vermont.
Great. So we got to do it.
Yes.
We can't clarify it to our liking
no.
necessarily. Well, unless we have anybody else that wants to chime in, I'd be open to taking a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
I make a motion to approve changes in the 2019 grand list as set forth on the reports entitled Errors and Omissions, Schedule 2019 Grand List, and Errors and Omissions, Schedule 2019 Tax Stabilization from Town Assessor Jennifer Brunel.
Great, thank you. Liz has made a motion to approve the changes in the 2019 grand list as set forth on those two reports aforementioned. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That's 4-0. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. In the fear of losing our audience to that conversation, I think...
Interested.
Good. I think I'll go on to item C, which is also confusing and strange. No, it's not. I'm
Less
joking.
so, I
Less
think.
confusing. The Windham-Windsor Housing Trust 2016 Six Scattered Site Grant closeout. Right. Public hearing.
Yes, so I would ask that you please open a public hearing.
Yes.
And then I will explain what we're doing here. And Bruce Whitney is here from the Windham-Windsor Housing Trust to speak to some of the details. Would you please open?
Yes, I will now officially open a public hearing.
Thank you.
Hi, Bruce.
So each time we finish administering a community development block grant project, we are required by the rules of the program to hold a public hearing where you hear the results of the work under that grant, and the public has an opportunity to tell you what they thought about it. The results in this particular case are not just here in Brattleboro, but actually to a broader geographic area that Mr. Whitney will describe here in a moment about the sort of full impact of this. And that's the result of this being one of a series of grants where because the town has maintained a good working relationship with the state, and because the state knows that Windham-Windsor Housing Trust is a very reliable administrator of these programs, there are other counties now outside of Windham and Windsor's usual jurisdiction, and certainly outside of Brattleboro, that are beneficiaries of grant funds that come from the state to the town to the agency, and are then implemented through the programming for whatever that particular grant is. And Bruce will tell us about this particular grant.
Yes, and I'm Bruce Whitney. I'm the Director of Home Ownership with Windham and Windsor Housing Trust. And because of errors, I gave you an updated report. And really the updates are on the numbers on the second page, the chart. Due to my travel schedule and communication with Patrick, I'd given him historic numbers, but the numbers here are just for this grant period, and that's what we need to report on for this closeout. So you'll see the numbers in the updated report are October 1st, 17 through actually yesterday. We've got the most up-to-date numbers. We thank Brattleboro once again. The town of Brattleboro has sponsored this particular grant since 2014. We've been running this program for about 12 years. In the lingo of the state and CDBG, it's called the Scattered Site Grant because we are working throughout at this point, 5 counties. We did start in the Windham and Windsor counties, and in the grant period that started with this period, we are partnering with Downstreet Housing and Community Development, which is a sister agency to ours, and they cover the 3 counties of Lamoille, Orange, and Washington counties. So we're doing back office administration for that program. And the services we're providing are home repair loans to income eligible people. We can loan up to $25,000 for necessary health and safety repairs. We do housing counseling advocacy. We work with people who want to buy homes. We provide free one-on-one counseling, and we also provide an 8-hour education course that is in person, and we also have an online version. And those are offered in our location and also up at Mount Ascutney Hospital in Windsor. And then through that service, we're helping people buy homes, and they're leveraging our assistance and our down payment assistance to get mortgages. So on the back side, you'll see the results through these 2 years, almost 2+ years. We've done 40 home repair loans, 6 in Brattleboro, and that's so 15% of the loans have been in Brattleboro, and Brattleboro is a much smaller per capita population-wise. It would be much smaller than 15%. So Brattleboro continues to see an increased effect there. We've counseled 429 people over the period. 116 of those are in Brattleboro, and we helped 173 people buy homes, and 33 of those were in Brattleboro. So with that, we are closing out this grant. Brattleboro also sponsored the next grant, which will start January 1st. We will be spending this particular money through December 31st, and so we have 6 to 8 more home repair projects that we expect to be complete, and 10 in our construction pipeline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just need to throw out there, if people would be interested in getting more info, and how would they do that? If anybody watching is interested in.
Yes, they can go to homemattershere.org. Our main line is, let me see if I can remember, 254-4604. That gets you right to the front office, and you'll be directed to our program coordinator.
Thank you.
Tim?
Questions? Liz has.
I just wanted to congratulate you, Bruce, and your organization. And I think the most significant number is this 33 first-time home buyers in Brattleboro. That's great. Thank you.
In a similar vein, I heard on the radio that Lamoille County is looking at a new low-income housing project, 25-unit project. I assume you're helping with that, and I hope you are. And one of the things that's unique about it is that they raise the income level to, I think it's 125% of poverty. A family could have an income up to $70,000 and still qualify for the housing assistance.
Well, in Downstreet is still running their own housing development program without assistance from us, other than collegial support. And yeah, that sounds like that money might be the state bond money, and the snow block also has, I think, 5 units that are up to 120% AMI. So we are housing people in that middle income right here in snow block.
I have a clarification question.
Yeah.
On the sheet you just gave, it lists home ownership assistance, but on the December 3rd letter we've got, it only mentions under the final hearing site grant provided home repair and housing counseling services. I'm wondering why the home ownership assistance wasn't.
I'm not sure why Patrick might have left that out. This is the report I provided him. The housing counseling is the service that helps people buy home ownership, buy homes. So maybe he just didn't maybe see it as a service,
It's
more
on the
as a
next
result.
page.
Yeah, it is in the detailed report. I think it was just an oversight that it wasn't mentioned in that paragraph that summarized what's in the detailed report.
Great.
I have a question about the home repair program. How do you guys do outreach for that program? You know, it seems like I work at SEVCA part-time and I have a little bit of inside knowledge on this. And you know, there are a lot of homes in this county that they're in need of repair. Are you guys actively looking for projects, or are you at capacity with what just kind of comes to you passively?
We are actively looking for projects. Our outreach includes working with partner agencies such as SEVCA, the Council on Aging. Those two tend to be our biggest referral sources, but we do media advertising from time to time. We are doing Facebook, we are doing Google AdWords. We've done some radio ads here in town through the radio stations, and actually radio is pretty interesting these days in that they're big companies that have lots of different stations. So we found that we got a good bang for the buck in doing some radio that actually was spread around the state. So.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
We're spreading cookies around.
Would you like a cookie? Elizabeth
No,
made
no,
cookies.
thank you. A colleague brought in Christmas cookies today, so I'm
Very nice. Well, the purpose of this obviously is to take any comments from the public, but it looks like, unless Russ has a comment there, or Chris, I don't think we have anybody here to ask any questions. So I can, if everyone's satisfied, I can close out the public hearing portion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
again
for the work.
Yeah.
Where are we? Okay. All right.
How could you forget?
So,
I'm sorry to leave you with no audience, but I am gonna have.
oh, that's
Well, there are thousands of people watching at home because of the weather.
get home safe, though.
Yeah, otherwise they'd be here.
Oh, they're watching on your shoulder.
I know.
That's good. Our town manager has stepped out, but we are about to enter item D, which is discussion of the FY21 proposed budget. We've had quite a few discussions, and how many meetings in a row? Does anybody remember?
Lots.
This is
Way too many.
yeah, I bet you know.
6.
Yeah,
This is
starting
6th.
November 5, then 12, 19, 26, December 3, 10, and 17.
I wasn't counting. That's
1,
8 in a
2,
row.
3, 4, 5, 6. We're on 7 right now.
And if anybody's wondering, that's probably was one of the factors influencing us not to postpone this meeting due to
Yes.
the weather. Because, wow, it was.
Because if
been a
it's
long haul.
Tuesday, we're meeting.
Yeah, exactly. No, but pushing it to
And the
next
next
Tuesday.
2 we won't be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We
If
will
you
not
wanna
be
let the
here.
public.
But I was stalling a little bit for our town manager because I know that he wants to give us a little info on the current status of our budget talks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, so if it's okay with the board, you've had an opportunity to review this, but I'd like to take just a minute. There's quite a number of different pending matters. I think it would be helpful to the public while on a stormy night we no longer have a public here in the room. We certainly hopefully have plenty of people watching at home, and I think it would be helpful to them to know what is pending, and then you can decide at that point. Tell me if there's anything else that ought to have been on this list. But quickly, there were no changes made to the proposed revenues during your initial review through the budget. And again, for the benefit of the public, I'll say we've been through a series of 6 or 7 meetings where the board has looked at every single part of the town's budget, every line item within every component piece of the budget for the general fund for FY21. And along the way, you talked about some things, made very few changes, but identified quite a number of issues that you still wish to address further in January. So there were no changes made to revenues. There were a couple of very minor changes made on the expenditure side based on information that came to you from others. So The Human Services Committee of the Representative Town Meeting recommended an amount of funding that was $4,510 higher than what we had put into the budget, which would have been level funding from last year. And you accepted that for the purposes of including that higher figure in the budget that you intend to recommend for this year's Representative Town Meeting to consider, so that your number will match the Human Services Committee's recommendation. And you also heard a request from the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Brattleboro Alliance for an increase of just $1,629 to the amount of funding for the Community Marketing Initiative that was funded at $42,119 in the current year's budget. That was 10% of the receipts through the rooms and meals tax from the prior year. They asked that instead of that $42,119 being the figure again, that you increase it to make it 10% of the prior year's receipts as a matter of policy going forward. You conceded agreed to that. Thank you. Yeah. You agreed to do that, sort of reserving judgment about future years, but for this year's budget, you intend to increase this number so that it reflects 10% of the prior year's receipts. So we have made that change as well. But beyond that, there's a number of matters that might have a substantially greater impact to the budget as it has been proposed and as you will ultimately recommend it to Representative Town Meeting. And those topics include the potential for a pool house renovation or replacement at Living Memorial Park. Staff has been collecting some additional information that we will bring forward to you for your consideration as to whether to add that to the capital plan. You asked for some additional information regarding the fund balance guideline so that you can look at the 10% standard that we've been applying now for about a decade or so in Brattleboro to see how that relates to best practices and the policies that exist in other towns. When we identified the line item of $10,000 of funding for porta potties and other sanitary actions of the town to maintain public health and provide a place for folks to go to the bathroom in the summer months when there's more people living outdoors in Brattleboro, you responded to that by saying that was fine as far as it went. You thought that there were a couple of aspects of that that required more review. One, that you'd like to see some information about what a more permanent installation might look like. We are prepared to show that to you, although I don't anticipate you're going to want to pursue any of that for this particular budget because there's some very high price tags attached to those, unfortunately. But we will be able to at least provide that information and perhaps talk about what we might pursue in the future.
I have a question on that.
Yes.
Are there grants available for things like that?
We are looking for that as well. We're hopeful, but we haven't found one yet. So if we can find a grant that we could bring to you in January together with the information about the systems we've identified, maybe there's an opportunity to move forward more assertively on this. If not, our expectation is that at least there'll be some initial information. We all can sort of look towards what we might want to achieve going forward, and we'll continue to be looking for a way forward to achieve that. But the least expensive units that we've seen so far are $150,000 to buy the unit, and the cost of getting it shipped here and installed with water and sewer service and so on is on top of that. So it'd be a very substantial investment versus the approximately $10,000 a summer cost of putting out the 3 porta potties. You also, my understanding of your concern that you raised was when you talked about more permanent solutions, I understood you to mean not just more permanent bathrooms in public spaces, but actually other ways in which the town might invest in things that help people not just cope with the situation, but improve their living conditions and ways in which we as a community can better support people who are living in vulnerable conditions in our community. And so there is a very specific piece of this report that addresses Project CARE. You asked for that information very specifically, and we are happy to provide, if you want to take that into a broader conversation, we'll be happy to provide additional information that may support that particular consideration. We've been asked to provide more visual budget information to make the information more accessible to a broader group of people throughout the community, for people to be able to see at a glance, graphically, the most important information about the budget. And what we advised you before and reiterated in this report is we're happy to do that in a sort of relatively more rudimentary way, using tools that already exist for us. Basically taking the Excel spreadsheet programs that we use to create the budget and applying the graphical tools that are part of that program, so that we can show you some pie charts and some bar charts and some things that do help make that information pop a little better. But for something that is more sophisticated than that and a bigger step forward, we'll be eager to talk with you more and talk with people in the community who have identified that they have some expertise in that area, and see what we might do in a more significant way forward on that for next year and beyond. The CEVEDS funding, once again, CEVEDS requested $3,000 per resident, or $36,000 worth of funding. You gave some consideration to that and to our report to you from staff that routinely now over the years the town has provided $2,000 per resident instead of $3,000.
Is it 3,000 or 3?
Oh my, sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
$3.
I know that
So
the total
sorry.
amount
Yeah.
is correct.
They would like
but
that.
I just don't want
Yeah.
anybody to be thinking.
Yep, nope,
We're
I
paying $3
wrote it wrong
each.
and said it wrong, I apologize. $3 per resident, 12,000 residents,
Yeah.
$36,000 for
Very
the
good.
year. Sorry about that. And so the funding we provided has been at $2 per resident, at around $24,000, $25,000 per year for several years now. You gave some consideration to that, but decided that you wanted to wait and make a decision about it in January when you're making your final budget decisions. In any event, whatever you decide about the amount, staff would continue to recommend that that funding come from program income rather than from general fund funding, because it is economic development related. It's an appropriate expense from that source of funding that comes from the CDBG loans that are made through the federal money, through the state to the town, that comes back into program income and can be reused for economic development purposes and housing purposes. And so we think that's an appropriate expense from that fund rather than what would be at $25,000 would be about a fifth of a penny on the tax rate. For Project CARE, you asked particularly what if the pay for recovery coaches was, first of all, recovery coaches have been providing their services as volunteers up until now. We did propose to you that there be funding provided, but we proposed it at a rate that would supply $12 per hour funding to the recovery coaches. And you asked us what would it take to make that $15 per hour, and also what would it take to fund transportation services to help the clients get to the appointments for their services. And we've run some numbers on that and would be prepared to add to the budget, if you approve this in January, $16,000 that would pay $12,000 to the recovery coaches and $4,000 to the providers of transportation. That $16,000 is equivalent to 14/100ths of a cent on the property tax rate. You indicated in our finale last week, in the first review, the first time through all the different line items, one of the items we looked at was the general services part of the budget, and in that, that one of the line items there is the salaries for select board members. That has been a source of much consideration at town meeting over recent years. We confirmed that the rate of pay for select board members has not been increased since 2012, and prior to 2012, the last time was 1996. So this has been very static over time, and you showed some interest in considering that. If you want us to bring you any additional information, I'll need to know what it is that would be helpful to you in that consideration.
What other select boards receive throughout the state?
Sure.
I know some of that.
It would be good to know what it was in 96 and what it was in 2012?
Sure.
I know what it was in 2012.
Yeah. Do you remember it?
Yeah, it was 2 and 3, so it was each member getting
Yeah.
2,000 per year and the chair getting 3, and then in 2012 it was raised to 3 and 5. So that's quite a jump when you look at the.
Yeah, at that moment it was quite a jump. Yeah, sure.
And we'll find out what it was
Yeah.
before 1996, if we can. I think we can.
I think on my research back when I was a town meeting rep, we are like well paid, funnily enough, for select boards throughout the state.
Yeah.
I think the discussion at town meeting is if the stipend were higher, more people might be interested.
Yeah, and I'll
We'll
remind
have-
everybody that, oh, sorry, that just for a point of order, it is always on as a article. So it invites the discussion we don't have to place it on the article because it has to be on the article to see what the town will pay its select board.
okay.
So it's
Yes.
all automatically ripe for discussion, which is why it's, almost always discussed.
That's what I was gonna say.
Sorry, tangent.
You also asked last week, and I should say these are being listed in the order in which you raised them during our first review, which is why this one, which otherwise probably should have been first, has appeared here in the middle of the list. You wish to review the select board's annual goals and our progress in pursuing those over the last 9 months for how well they're aligned with the proposed FY21 budget. And so what we'll plan to do is for the January 7th meeting, this is a fairly significant workload for January, and the schedule calls for meeting each of the 4 Tuesdays in January. And so what we'll plan to do at the outset of that to help you decide, make some choices about where you go from there in the further review of these other items, is we'll provide that quarterly update that we do regarding your the progress, I should say. Some of it's yours and some of it's staff working on behalf of the things that you've directed. But our collective progress towards your annual goals will be reported at the January 7th meeting, so you can give that consideration to the relationship between the goals and the budget as you work through the rest of the pending budget items. When we were discussing the savings that the HRA has provided within the town's health insurance program, the health reimbursement arrangement, we talked about the fact that in the early years of that, we protected ourselves with cautious budgeting because we were concerned that the actuarial information we had received about where we would likely end up is, by the very nature of actuarial estimates, an average and an expectation, and there could be a bad year where it could have significantly negatively affected the budget. We now have several years of administering the program under our belts, and while there is always the potential, and there will someday be a bad year, we're seeing really significant consistency from year to year, even though the individual claims vary and the number of claims and the severity of claims varies. As a group, we're large enough that the impact to the HRA portion of our budget has been really consistent. And so we feel comfortable bringing that down, which freed up some money to be available to be either a lower tax rate or invested in other services and programs, depending on your perspective. And so you asked us to confirm for your understanding and for you to be able to independently gauge the level of risk we're taking on here, what portion the funding for the HRA, the proposed funding for the HRA, what proportion of the overall exposure that the town has is represented in that funding. The answer is that the actuaries, based on our current plan design, the actuaries forecast that we should expect to spend 50% of our total exposure. And our total exposure is $415,000. If we did expend that 50%, it would be $207,500. The proposed FY21 budget includes $215,000, so still just slightly above the actuarial estimate. No longer a significant cushion, but sort of a rounding cushion. The $215,000 represents 51.8% of our total exposure, which is 103.6% of the actuarial estimate. There are 3 different organizations that you asked to come in and appear before you so that you could have some interaction with them about their parts of our budget during your January meetings. And so if you continue to want that, if you don't give us different direction tonight, we'll go ahead and work with these 3 to schedule them to come in. And we'll do that for the first 2 evenings. We'll shoot for January 7th and January 14th for these appearances, with the hope and expectation that most of the additional work you're going to do substantively on this is going to be on the 7th and the 14th, so that by the time we get to the 21st, we're narrowed down to just the final issues, where maybe in the 7th and the 14th you've asked for some additional information or that sort of thing, so that by the time we're done on the 21st, you know what you want 100%, and we're able to put before you and the public on the 28th a budget where you're able to just look at it and say, yes, that's our budget. That's the goal of the January evolution of the final stage of this process. And the 3 organizations that you're asking to come in are the Windham Regional Commission, the Representative Town Meeting Human Services Committee, and the Southeastern Vermont Transportation, which is the bus service that provides the current and mover services in Brattleboro. You also identified a 4th organization you'd like to hear from, but indicated that you didn't need to hear from them during the budget process. And because January is going to be such a full plate of business, we'd suggest that this occur in the spring, at least after you put your budget to bed, maybe after town meeting. And that's Rescue Inc. We'll invite them to come in sometime in the few months ahead. That's the list, I believe. Let me double check the next page. There is one more, sorry.
Small item.
There is one more item, and it's the cost of the additional storage for the body-worn cameras. There was a concern that was raised because it sounded like a lot of money compared to what people know they can buy storage for personal use. We've confirmed that, yes, that's true. The contractual relationship with Axon, who provides the storage and related services, which retrieval and in some cases actually editing the material so that the proper things are redacted when they're being prepared to go to court and that sort of thing, for the body-worn camera footage that is collected by police officers as they respond to different incidents. In amending the contract with Axon to add additional storage within that, the context of those services that are provided, the cost for 2 additional terabytes is $3,000. The overall contract is on the order of $15,000 to $20,000. I don't remember the exact figure, but we can confirm that again for you if that's important. The question you asked us last week was to confirm that it really is $3,000 for the additional 2 terabytes of storage, and the answer to that is yes. Finally, you identified as articles for which, or topics for which you intend to place separate articles on the town meeting warning, separate and apart from just being included in the select board's proposed budget. Would include the CEVEDS funding, the Human Services funding, and the Community Marketing Initiative funding. And so as we prepare the draft warning for your review, which you'll also be looking at on January 21st and January 28th, we'll include those items as separate warning articles.
Now, 2 out of 3 of those is traditional.
That's correct. In fact, I believe Human Services is required by state statute to be a separate item. And CEVEDS has traditionally been a separate item. The Community Marketing Initiative, of course, is new. So, but you indicated last week you'd like that to be presented to town meeting as a separate article.
Well, I think it's complete. I can't, does anyone have something that Peter forgot to add to the list?
I think this is plenty. Actually, I'm not sure what, I don't know that we can become, I can't remember the words you used, Peter, but experts on HRA funding. I think I'm not sure what we can decide or what would be, where we would go even for a conversation about that, other than...
My understanding was that you just wanted to satisfy yourselves. When we talked about it generally as being, we had approached it conservatively, and now we've sort of brought that back in, but we believe still to a prudent place, not to a reckless place. I think you wanted to understand what did that mean in numbers. If this is sufficient, that's not an item we need to come back to as we go through the January process, then that'd be great.
Feels to me like we could put a check mark by that one unless Brandy, has a question herself.
Okay.
She could always put it back on. We wouldn't mind, probably. Just trying to lighten the load here. I was
Yeah,
also
exactly.
looking at the organization appearances. I felt like one of them was certainly needed, and I will just ask the board, whoever else wanted to have the transportation folks come before us. Do you think it's necessary for the budget discussions?
I think it's necessary for the advancement of our goals, because that was an item on our goals.
Okay. I guess just in the budget crunch is what I was suggesting, that maybe it would be something that we might push like we are doing with rescue.
Right.
Unless it's tied to funding for you in your...
No, I mean, I think that's a good point. Like, out of the conversation we're going to have with the bus folks, do we imagine that we're going to say, hey, wait a second?
Well, they've already been approved for the year or something like that. You negotiated that.
No,
it's
it's been a standard amount for quite a few years now of $50,000. If as part of your communication around the services that are provided, you decided that feels like too much or too little, that could be adjusted in your recommended budget to the representative town meeting. Or you could approach this as $50,000 is the amount that we've been allocating for this purpose. We've got some things we'd like to accomplish in the way the service is delivered. For now, it's not a budget matter, it's an operational matter. And
I think my
Go from
concerns
there.
are more operational, and I would be happy to defer. But one of my goals in the select board roster is to have those operational changes to make bus usage more feasible and more likely.
Yeah. And better understanding as to how we might make that happen.
The presentation that they do is full of information.
Yeah.
It's definitely worth doing. I would rather put it off too and really delve into it. It's
Okay,
So-
there you go.
do you want to have them in February?
Yeah, that'd be
Since
nice.
it's part of this board's goals for the year
Yes.
to improve that service, we could have them come in February when this board is still the board, and we could have rescue be later in the spring when many of you, maybe all of you, will still be here, but
Who knows?
Just in case you're not, since rescue's operation hasn't been part of our annual goals this year, we'll have that come secondary.
That
Make
works.
sense?
And
Yep.
just while we're asking questions about this, why was the regional commission, why are we asking them to come at this point? To talk about why we give them so much money, was it?
Well, you could say the same thing about the bus company, right? I mean, I think that was the impetus in part.
Is Wyndham Regional's allocation it's part of the budget?
Yeah.
It is part of the budget. In that case,
28,150.
it's more like rescue in that it's part of a regionally applied formula, and our number comes out of that formula, and they say, here's what you owe.
Yes, it's regionally applied formula, but is it mandated? Or is it more like CEVEDS, where we have some flexibility? Because that CEVEDS amount is just a construct.
That's a good question.
I don't know if it is statutorily required or not. I would say the CEVEDS one is explicitly voluntary and is a process that's sort of evolved in recent years. And the Windham Regional Commission one has been applied much more like
Religiously,
dues.
yeah.
Whether it actually is statutorily dues or not, I don't know the answer to. I know that it's been for decades applied in the manner that it has been applied. And unlike CEVEDS, where individual communities make a decision from year to year about whether or not to pay their allocated share, it's paid more like the county tax allocation, where the power be makes its decision, tells you what your share is, and you pay it.
Well, maybe I just have an inquiry whether that's mandated or the voluntary.
Sure.
Yeah, I for one, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I recall asking that question the first time I saw it too, and I don't remember. The impression was, well, we just have to, but I don't know. Let's find out.
I mean, I guess like
We'll
the
find
spirit was like, are we getting value for money, right? What does this money represent? How does this benefit the people of Brattleboro?
Well, and
those
particularly,
are my big questions.
particularly the per capita number,
Right.
because I feel that these groups that ask for money per capita may not give Brattleboro a commensurate service that outlying towns who pay significantly less might be the focus of their efforts.
Are you thinking with the regional commission that we already have a really good planning department and we don't require the regional
Yes, I
commission's
am.
help as much as other places?
Feeding Liz lines.
I'm thinking about Liz's experience.
No communications district then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me just say that I think that this kind of got mixed in with the whole county tax situation
Yes,
because it
it did.
appeared right next
Yeah.
to each other. I, for one, am very happy with the services the Windham Regional Commission provides, and I think they do excellent work. Just want to get that out there.
Yeah, no, they're great.
No, my question really
Oh, and I know
is
that
whether
you're-
that formula is statutory.
Sure.
or
So
flexible.
perhaps it's more of a staff response
Sure.
than a
And,
bring them
kind
before
of,
us.
what are we getting for that money?
I'm more interested in the county side. What are we getting for the money?
Yeah, for real.
So how about if we provide that required versus voluntary answer? That's a really clear, is it in the statute or is it not? Or is it in something that got adopted within the region that's a
Yes.
legal document or not? And then if we provide that to you for consideration on January 7th, you could tell us on January 7th whether you want them to visit on either the 14th or the 21st.
Yeah, they
Or later.
also
Or
regularly
later.
send us a letter saying what they did for us in the
Yeah.
year. And
Whether we-
Sue
In the
must
town
have that.
report, there's usually.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
true.
So comparing those things together, I think would be handy for us to do on the 7th.
Okay.
They might not be ready.
Well,
without
I
little
think
notice,
we could
but
have whatever
yeah.
the last one was, whatever the last reporting is.
Oh,
No, I think we have a report this year.
Yeah.
So I have like a newbie question. It feels like I've been here a while.
You
still
can
being
get away
newbie,
with it
but-
for another few months,
Yeah.
and no more.
So let me just understand the process here. So this was sort of like an overview of the things we're still thinking about.
Correct.
And at our next meeting, on January 7th, we'll come back to this list of things and get into it a little bit more, or
So
is this the time to be getting
what we'll
into it?
try to do, or what we will do to try to be helpful, is divide these into manageable pieces for the next 2 meetings. So approximately half of this load will be on the 7th, and approximately half of this load will be on the 14th, with the intent that it helps you decide what you're satisfied with. You might make some decisions on the 7th and be done with certain things. You might find that there's some things you still want some more information about, so we would go get that for you. But by the time we get to close of business on the 14th, hopefully you're nearly done, right? You're down to just the last few things that you are still grappling with. So that on the 21st, you can be done, make your final decisions. And then on the 28th, what would be before you, and we'll also have, on the 21st, we'll review the draft warning for representative town meeting. So then on the 28th, what happens is you have a short special meeting, you come together, you look at the warning as it may have been revised based on your direction from the week before, and the budget in what is hopefully its final form, and you say, yep, that's our warning and that's our budget. Or you do final tweaking if necessary. But if we don't get to where we're nearly done or substantively done on the 21st, it makes the 28th chaotic. We've got to, on the 28th, in order to meet the statutory requirements for the window of time within which the warning needs to be approved, and then everything needs to be final and ready to go into the town report, we need to have you make your final decisions on the evening of the 28th.
Okay.
This moment in time, I want to be really clear, is not meant to say, here's your list, this is what we're going to do. It's meant to say, here's what I understand your list to be. And if there's something missing or something that needs to be modified in some way, and we've been just doing that, right? You've been clarifying your intent on a couple of things. But if there is something that you think is missing from this that needs to be on the list, now's the time to say so that we're well prepared for our work in January.
Okay.
Now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in at least the past couple of years that I've been on the board, we've had those 4 meetings in January in case there was more that came up. And I'm also kind of wondering if there's a chance we could get it down to 3 meetings. If one of them does become the 28th and we keep the 2 regulars, perhaps that 14th could be
Depends on us.
eliminated.
So,
Yeah, it does depend on us, you're correct. But I'm looking for consensus on the board if we think it might be possible.
Yeah.
Slightly longer
Peter
meetings.
probably knows best.
I'd like to make an unpleasant or an unwelcome observation. I'd love to say, yeah, that's better. I know you've met every week now for
A million.
8 or 9
8
weeks.
weeks,
I'm gonna get a little break these next couple of weeks, and then it's 4 more in a row. I get that that's onerous. This particular list is longer than we often have at this moment in time. Sometimes what we have is more change that has already occurred in the budget and fewer pending items. This year, I think quite appropriately, as you encountered some things where there was some difference of opinion, you said, yeah, let's get through the first review, and then we're going to come back and learn more about those things and resolve those things. And the result of that is, I think you've got a really full plate here, even for 2 meetings. And trying to put it all onto the 7th is ambition.
Thought I'd throw it
We
out
can
there.
do it if that's what you
We did
prefer.
successfully push one of the presentations off.
You did push one of the
Maybe two,
preservation off.
Maybe 2.
One of the presentations off.
And we know about the police storage, so we have to do
Yeah.
that again.
Yeah.
And the HRA.
If it's your pleasure that we have a really full list, this entire list of pending matters on the 7th, and see if we can get through all of it, we'll do that. We'll be happy to provide that. And then, if you don't get through all of it, you roll some of it over to the 14th.
So the 7th is a regular meeting?
7th is
So
a
there'll be
regular meeting.
Other stuff to do beyond the budget?
There will be, as of right now, it's not a heavy agenda, but it's still early yet for the 7th. But it's also going to be a holiday period where there's not
Sure.
likely to be a lot of things generated to go onto that agenda.
Right.
We could take a shot at getting it all done on the 7th if that's what the board would like to do.
Tim?
Oh, yes.
I wonder if we could also set aside the conversation about the $3 per resident, since the town is going to decide that anyway. The 7th's $3.
Oh, no.
You need to
No.
decide what you're recommending
Oh, we're, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind.
on that one.
Okay,
We have to have a number in there, I think.
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. And that's always a fun discussion, anyway.
Well, I'm looking at them, the fund balance in the past has, can take a whole meeting on by itself. There's incredibly a lot of philosophical stuff in there, and a lot of fiscal stuff as well. And, Sebeds, again, it's going to be decided by the town, by the representatives, so.
I wouldn't give, we do have the power to recommend.
Otherwise, yeah. Yeah, I'm suggesting that we just leave it as it is. Take their request.
Or
Let the town decide.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
You are? That's what you're
Well, let's
suggesting?
not launch into that discussion.
Okay.
Hasn't been warned.
Oh, well, it's actually on our agenda right here.
Well, this is kind of a check-in. I'm not sure we should start debating it.
No, fine.
I
Trying to
think
get rid of
knowing
things.
this board, that we need every single one of these meetings.
Yep.
And if some of those meetings we get to go home half an hour earlier than we thought we might, then so be it.
Daniel, I'm concerned that you're going to want more money if we meet this many times.
I couldn't possibly comment. I didn't at all prepare some talking points around that.
It's not on the agenda.
Exactly.
But it sort of is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I think we need all those meetings. Maybe we get done a bit early some nights. I don't know.
Okay.
But I think it would be,
For me, it
unless
all
that
depends
January
on if-
7th meeting has almost nothing else for us to do, and it would be mostly budget.
It doesn't have almost nothing else. It's
Yeah.
light,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have almost nothing else. I don't recall right now. I recall one very specific item. I don't recall what the others are, and I believe there's like 3 or 4 substantive matters right now on that agenda.
All right.
As long as all this is okay with Jan, I'm
It's good by me.
What is Jan's pleasure?
Power behind the throne.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Daniel. It would be very heavy to have a January 7 meeting with 2 holidays in between to try to prepare for that and make it the only
And it might
meeting.
snow.
If it
We
snows,
don't
we're
have
having
to
a meeting.
decide
Doesn't
until
make any
January
difference.
7 whether things roll over to the next week.
Yeah.
Nobody
So
knows.
we're gonna divvy these up then. We're not gonna put them all on for the 7th. We're gonna do some on the 7th, some on the 14th. If that's the place you've landed, I'd suggest that the Human Services Committee visit be on the 14th. I think it's important that the goals discussion happen on the 7th. And I also think that if you have a robust discussion of the fund balance guideline, I think David's right that that is something that could take a while. Heads up, foreshadowing to that, I would suggest that if you decide that as a group you think that there's room to maybe do something different, that deciding that in one evening in the midst of all the rest of this is not the best way to change a guideline. That the guideline is long-term planning, best practice. How are we trying to manage town finances as opposed to a decision you're making this year about this year's finances? So I would just urge you to be really cautious. I'm telling you, once we report back to you about that, we're going to give you the information you've asked for. And I have full respect for the fact that you might take it to a place where that guideline gets in play, but I think you should be really careful about changing the guideline in the middle of a budget process in order to free up some cash for that budget process. So with that caveat, that might be an item that takes an hour or 2 to discuss, or it might be an item that takes 5 or 10 minutes.
I vote for the 5 or 10 minutes.
I understand what your point, and thank you for making it. That's exactly what I want you to say. The conversation generally strays into, well, if we did 9.5%, we could do a 2-cent tax increase instead of 3.5. That's where the conversation often goes. So, which means that we change it. We don't necessarily change the guideline, but that year we decide we're going to take a chance and make it 9.5.
So anyway, I just people should be ready for that to develop, if history is any indicator. The other thing is that as far as using all of these times and talking about these things, I think it's really important, because we need to know what we're talking about. And a lot of these are complicated. This is the first time for 2 people. And it's just, Daniel keeps saying a newbie question, but it's
I'm
actually,
good.
it's
I did my
actually,
homework.
I'll finish. Okay. It's actually a due diligence question every time. It's something that we need to understand. So,
Yeah,
as much as
well,
I'd
yeah,
like to
well.
go home at 6:30 every night, it doesn't work that way.
Wasn't advocating for leaving anything off.
Oh, I know.
Or incomplete discussions. I was advocating for fuller meetings, that's all.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that because it's really important. I don't have as many questions because I already asked them all. Poor John. Every budget, I had something new that I didn't understand, and it's another 10 minutes off his life. No wonder he retired.
Okay, let's see, where are we then?
I think we're at the place where you've done some modifying to this. I could go through it if you want, but I don't think that's necessary, especially since it's just the list and not actions on the list. But I can list those things, the things you've modified tonight if you want. Otherwise, I just need to know whether you think anything's missing. You've made that sort of more material decision that you are going to meet on both the 7th and the 14th. So we're going to divvy this up into, probably like a 60-40. Take a bigger bite out of it that first night,
That
but
makes
have
sense.
still a fair amount of business on for the second night. And we'll go from there.
Do you have any sense of whether the staff will have a cost estimate for the pool house on the 7th?
Yes.
Okay.
I can tell you, we've
There are
actually,
pool people that want to come.
we've got a more solid number now than I knew we had. So what I told you when we discussed that was we'd be bringing you a thumbnail number. We're actually going to have more of an engineer's cost estimate. It's still just that.
An estimate,
It's
yeah.
not any kind of a design, but it's a range of costs and some information around that. We just don't have it packaged for you yet.
Great.
But we definitely will have that for the first meeting.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to call out that often we have, our number 11 is correspondence, and that always includes the department monthly reports. And I just want to say that I always appreciate them, and this time, that's where I got my comment about the fire hydrants. But this time, there's also a little report from BCTV, which is interesting, and informational, and a nice reminder that the Recreation and Parks Department has some great things happening for families around the holidays and for last night, we call it here. So
Yeah, they're great.
check it out on brattleboro.org. You can find links to the PDF of their event schedule.
And all the communications that we get are all there on the website.
True. All right. Anyone have a motion to close out the evening?
What time is it? Is there anything else we can talk about?
I move that we adjourn.
All right. Liz has made a motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thanks, BCTV.
Thank you.
Did it. Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Yes.
I should have said that.
Oh, that's what I should have talked about. Yeah, there's a
see you next
Shine a
year.
Light series of events to do with Hanukkah. The